back on the computer, and we'll see if this works again. But I'm interested in this concept of the sector being in a state of sort of being teenagers, right? And I think I'm going to be a little bit more tolerant now of it because we all know what it's like to be teenagers. Somehow we all survived, but I'm not quite sure. But it is, are you seeing more demand sort of domestically or internationally in your work?
And Alison, your question is around developed markets versus emerging markets?
Exactly, yes.
So I would say if investors were first dipping a toe into impact investing, generally you'll go for slightly safer bets. And again, it's very dependent, right, on what the impact objectives are of the specific individual, client, or family. But typically you would first dip your toe into, okay, geographies that I'm more familiar with, Canada in this case, in terms of most of our audience participating. I'm based in London, UK. So we see a lot of European families first dipping a toe into their backyard to test out the concept. And then they get braver and they go, okay, actually, I like this concept of being able to integrate financial and impact returns. Let's try a little bit more globally. And once they see the level of need that's necessary in the emerging market space, then the question is, well, that's a high risk geography that I don't know well. What are the structures in the market that I can participate in where I'm more de-risked and I can still get that financial objective and target that I need, which is fair, and which is why I think that the growth of those different types of instruments and different structures enabling people to fit into different layers and tiers of capital would be important for, especially for that deployment towards EM.
Yeah, that's really it. Priorities, like what are specific things that are being done to guide people towards impact investing?
Alison, I think you were...
Yeah, you cut out for a bit and we didn't hear the full question.
So I'd like you to get as specific as possible. So the question's directed at Ava in terms of specific strategies to guide high net worth individuals towards impact investing opportunities.
For sure. I think strategies around this work is really important because it can feel very fraught and overwhelming for individuals who are really new to the space. So I would say first, a strategy that I've liked to employ in the past has been getting individuals aligned on what their values are and what excites them or distresses them when it comes to social and environmental issues. And oftentimes, whether it's a family office vehicle, foundation, like private family foundation structure, individuals are coming together with different perspectives to align on a general direction. So this can be an intense exercise, but when people put in the work, it can really highlight areas of alignment, areas of curiosity, and also create a sense of empowerment almost, because in the face of all of these themes and issues that are happening within the world that can feel very distressing, there is an element of, okay, here's something that we can do. We can focus on X issue and deploy money towards it. And in this way, we're making a difference in our small area of the world. So I think sitting down, aligning on values and deciding on a sense of direction is really important. I would say also providing education for individuals to make the case of what I was saying earlier, which is that Doing good and making money do not need to be separate things. Providing an evidence case to demonstrate, different investment practices, different financial innovations that are happening, case studies from Canada and globally to highlight how far the sector has come, and just generally make it clear that this is a viable path for investment and a viable path for individuals with wealth to deploy that capital to make a difference. And then I would say finally, one strategy is just to pick one starting place. I think to my previous point, it can feel very overwhelming when you think about all of the different issues that are at play. But the first thing is not the only thing. It's not something that you're tethered to forever. It's just a starting point to begin to understand and put these elements into practice. And usually the first one is the most difficult, just like a little bit of an emotional process. But once you're in it and learning, it gets a lot easier to understand what moves to make moving forward.
Fantastic. That was great and really thorough. And I can see, I'm sure some of those family discussions are pretty fraught, right? Because people don't always align on what it is that they want to do, let alone understanding the potential impact that they can have. And so bringing all of those just folks together for that kind of discussion would be incredibly interesting. So I love that. I love that picture that you painted. Okay, I'm going to go over to you, Dave, now. So what strategies are you seeing as being employed by wealth managers to ensure that the intergenerational transfer of wealth leads to actual impactful and sustainable investment? So once you get them aligned, how do we actually, what kind of tools and tactics are we seeing to ensure that the funds are being used to actually create real impact? That's a really tough question.
Yeah, it is, because there are barriers, right? And I think a lot of the barriers still on the families and individuals as opposed to institutions. It probably is true there as well, but is the sort of barriers that prevent people from doing it in the first place. Then you have the issue of, okay, well, once you're doing it, are these actually impactful and sustainable investments? And so I maybe tackle the first part of that question first. And I think, again, here there's an issue of education, like what is it and what's out there and what opportunities exist, and education around the risk and return trade-offs, and that it's not necessarily true that you have to sacrifice returns or meaningful amounts to take on a lot more risk to make impactful investments. I think the answer is it depends. But also, just like get back to the kind of original point I made, which is like you really have to understand what matters to you and what do you care about, and do you have the financial capacity to support and impact the causes that you want to, while still achieving your own objectives. That, I think, comes with financial planning, and in financial planning, these like literally building projections into the future and giving people the type of clarity that most, quite frankly, wealth advisors don't spend time and energy doing for clients, is really important, because it gives you that sense of, okay, I've got a clear sense of what I'm going to have. But then it's also the issues like, okay, so how much impact investing is appropriate, and what can I afford to do, and what does that look like? And so I'm a big fan of, if we're getting to get really specific, wealth managers who run money for individuals and households would create an investment policy statement. And that investment policy statement outlines all sorts of things, like how much risk they're going to take, what types of investments they're allowed to make, and what types of weights are they allowed to allocate dollars. But it doesn't talk about impact. And so I'd love to see investment policy statements as a standard include a section on, okay, well, what type of values alignment or impact is important to the client, and how are we going to integrate that, and what types of limits, so that they've got a clear idea about, okay, if 10% of my portfolio, if I'm looking at impact investments that are in venture capital or private equity or private debt in the private markets, how much of that's appropriate? Most people don't have a lot of experience with private market investing, and so they need some of that guidance. And then the last thing I'd say, which I think is an interesting opportunity that I don't think a lot of people taking advantage of, and I think it goes along with education, is what type of capital do you have that is best suited to directing towards the very, if you've got several causes or issue areas that you want to try to impact, what's the most appropriate form of capital? So, I use an obvious example of, hey, if disaster relief in developing countries is really, important to you, well, hey, let's use your philanthropic dollars. We don't have opportunity to set up investments when there's a typhoon that hits and people are out without food and water. We have to get resources in immediately, and so philanthropic dollars are really, really valuable in that context. If we're talking about economic development in developing countries, as an example, or here in developed markets, there's a much better opportunity for setting up impact investments that both make those dollars go further, but also lead to the type of long-term sustainability that even beyond these impact investment dollars, these institutions that are working on, and organizations working on economic development will eventually be able to go to the regular markets at some point, and be able to raise capital there and not be limited only to impact investors, because they got into this habit and this culture of, I have investors, and that means that we have responsibilities to return the capital, provide a return, and you start developing the capacity to serve investors, which is something that a lot of nonprofit organizations, for instance, don't have in their DNA. But that's a good example of where, let's use your investment dollars there, and let's so where do we direct our different forms of capital? I think is an important conversation.
Yeah, I think that's great. And it also, to me, harkens back to some of the comments that Diane was talking about in terms of blended finance and layers of finance and appropriateness of different types of vehicles like philanthropy. Sometimes there just isn't an impact investment, right? It's, as you said, is disaster relief. It's philanthropic. Let's be really clear that dollars are needed for this purpose. But where there is an opportunity to get a return, then we need to introduce that concept and flow different types of funds accordingly. So that just makes us and encourages us to think like a system. And what are the different kinds of partners that can meet different types of financial needs? So Diane, let me go to you a little bit to talk about innovations. Passion of mine. And so what do you see as some of the innovations in impact investing space that fund managers are using to impact alignment and delivery? What are you seeing?
Yeah, also one of my favorite topics, Alison. I think we're seeing a lot of promising developments in the market. I'll just name a few. One of the interesting trends we're seeing is the linkage of performance fees to impact goals as well as financial goals. And I think it really depends on the context, measurability, et cetera, in terms of where it's most relevant. But as an anecdotal example, we recently had, with one of our impact strategies, co-created over the course of multiple months, an impact-linked performance fee mechanisms with some of our clients and investors. And I think I'm seeing that kind of interest in just laying it transparently out there for all parties to see, well, what are our key impact objectives for investing in this strategy, and how do we then align those interests around the table to make sure that we're delivering both those financial and impact returns. So I can see a potential trend there where you could have more demand from clients as to how we're doing that, impact alignment. And then, managers then also supplying solutions around how these mechanisms work. And I think part of that is also the increasing robustness around the impact verification process, which really sort of grew, I would say, only in the last 1 or 2 years, where we're seeing more impact verifiers come to the market and offer their services to provide that credibility in terms of third-party verification. So I think that's an interesting development that I'm excited to track and participate in. I think maybe one of the other areas I'll mention is that we see the level of sophistication of clients increasing over time around that credibility, robustness in impact measurement and reporting that they're really yearning for in order to really prove out, right, as we were saying, the actual impact is being delivered. So what I'm excited to see is that more and more fund managers are also seeing that demand. They want to remain competitive from both a financial and impact perspective. And because of that, there's actually more and more collaboration across the marketplace around how do we actually converge impact measurement methodologies. If I'm measuring, let's say emissions avoided or the depth of health outcomes of a certain intervention, and that's in no way comparable to what another manager is providing, then it makes it really hard for the investor or family to actually compare and contrast and allocate their capital efficiently to impact. So I think fund managers are seeing that and then seeing the need to really collaborate. And so this collaboration hopefully will lead to various areas being intensively worked on so that we can really start to see that consistency across measurement and reporting. And I'd like to say that, for impact, we're probably where ESG was 5, 6, 7 years ago, where at that time, again, there was a lack of, I would say, ESG data convergence. And I think fast forward to now, I think ESG is in a better place from a comparison convergence perspective, even though there's more room, obviously, to go. And I think impact will need that concerted effort to also get there, to really reassure clients that we're doing good and we're delivering actual impact in the world.
Wow, that was great. And I'm got excited and encouraged to hear about the collaborations that are happening. And yeah, we can always learn from those fields that are ahead of us, like ESG, and hopefully accelerate our learnings by figuring out what they did right and what they did wrong. Can you talk a little bit more about the performance metrics? Like, what are you seeing? Like, tell me just a little bit more about that. I think people will find that very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it is an obvious, point perhaps, but on the environmental side, I think it is slightly easier because there's more clarity in terms of what metrics we're trying to measure. I think for climate change, given that this is, one of the most prominent topics we keep facing and keep getting demands from clients for, I think it's more obvious around that avoided emissions metric that I mentioned that people are really looking at. Some people call it scope 4, but I think, whilst we have protocols covering scopes 1, 2, 3, we're really now working to converge on how we calculate that avoided emissions metric on the climate change side. So I think that's progress and important. I think we then look at the broader environmental outcomes that we want to achieve. Like we call it planetary boundaries. So how do we, reduce pollution to land, water, air? And there's a little bit less convergence. So it might be, like water or biodiversity. That's sort of coming as a next wave, I would say, after climate change and the convergence of metrics around that. And we've seen some great developments in biodiversity recently, which is very positive. I think then when we get to social and what we call inclusive capitalism, which includes education, health, etc., you can imagine that I think the performance KPIs we're seeing often are still very much at the outputs level in terms of that ability to aggregate. And I think definitely a lot more work needs to be done in terms of characterizing the depth of impact we're creating and having some way of providing more consistency in reporting in terms of the depth of education outcomes, the depth of health outcomes. And there are, of course, a lot of experts in the area working specifically on those topics. But I think we've probably got the furthest to go from the social thematic perspective. And I think we need to be very mindful that we don't leave social behind whilst the world is recognizing the urgency around climate change, because all of these topics are in the end interlinked.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think it's an issue with the sector writ large. We've been struggling to get beyond outputs for a very long time. It is, easy to count bums in seats, as we lovingly say, but what was the impact? What actually changed as a result of being exposed to an education or an intervention? That seems to really have been tough for us. And yes, we've made developments and we're doing better, but I don't think we are at the place that anybody needs us or wants us to be. So thankfully, there's lots of folks working on that. So fantastic. Okay, let me go over now to, and actually I'll throw this to both Ava and Dave. What are the challenges? So we've talked about opportunities and we've talked about innovations. What are some of the challenges that are faced by wealth managers in really facilitating this intergenerational transfer of wealth towards impact investing? So Ava, maybe I can start with you.
I think the challenges are broad. I think one thing that I think we run into quite consistently is what the overall objective is for the financial system, for folks with capital that are looking to deploy it. Are we looking to create something new and actually forge solutions for social and environmental issues? Or are we just looking to feel less bad about making money and framing it in a slightly different way? And I see a lot of evidence to the latter, where there can be a lot of discussion, a lot of conversation, a lot of kind of surface level excitement, but less commitment to actually reconceptualizing the system in a way that it needs to be. And I think we're at risk of just sort of replicating our current financial system with all of the inequality, all of the strife associated with it in a way that I don't think anybody is particularly interested in. So I think alignment broadly and understanding the main goals is a huge barrier. I think also the significant disconnection between individuals who are in decision-making positions and the kind of outcomes of these investments related to social and environmental outcomes, there's a huge space between those. And if we want to understand specifically how capital can impact social and environmental issues, how can it positively impact communities that have been traditionally marginalized, I think it's really important to mend that space, mend that chasm between those two sides. And I think advisors, wealth managers, individuals who support those that are deploying capital have a responsibility to kind of stand within that and think differently about how they can facilitate investments that actually have that impact.
Wow. Yeah. So there's some challenges.
Just a couple.
So there's some challenges. Okay, fantastic. Let's go to David and see what any thoughts that you may have.
Yeah, I love what Ava just said. All of that, I would underscore all of that. I think, playing off of that a little bit, this idea of kind of, are we talking about true impact investments, or are we just interested in performative stuff that, feels good and sounds good, but doesn't really matter much beyond the, satisfying our own need to make ourselves feel better, about what we're doing. And one of the biggest challenges I face and I, working on constantly with Kind Wealth is that everyone's on a journey, right? And no two journeys look the same. And that journey of both understanding yourself, but understanding, the impact investing and so how, in particular, social change occurs, and understanding the underlying problems and causes and kind of removing our blind spots. And I've been on a journey for, a dedicated journey for probably 12 years now. It took me a long time to really get it. I mean, somebody could have told me at day one things like, I would talk about right now things like, hey, we should be thinking a lot about the impact that our investments are having on the systems themselves, rather than, this idea of output versus, impact. Like, are we just measuring how many, female entrepreneurs we're funding, or are we looking at what are the various ways that we can shift power to not just women, but all, marginalized groups, that they don't have to continue to, depend on and require the benevolence of, Silicon Valley white males running VC funds to decide whether, it's in vogue at the moment to to allocate capital to women entrepreneurs. Let's get capital into the hands and decision making, and what's the entire kind of pipe work, and piping of capital look like, so that we can identify those various points. Like, understanding that is an important point, but like trying to tell somebody that at day one on their journey is, it's not necessarily going to land. And so how do you respect that people are going to have to come to their own, not just like being aware of an idea, but really internalizing it, understanding it, and then wanting to act on it, is a big challenge. And I think it comes with patience and time, and giving people the opportunity to explore on their own without sort of lecturing at them. But also, how do we do that and speed that up and make that happen faster? And I don't have a good answer for that question. It's something I experiment with a lot. And just very quickly, the last thing I would say here is I think we have a real big bottleneck in the industry at the financial advisory level. Financial advisors are very behind the curve on impact investing. A lot of them are very behind the curve on ESG investing, and that's kind of firmly should be in their wheelhouse if we're talking about public market securities for the most part. And it's not a huge gap from the types of conversations they're already used to having, because we can frame ESG around helping to mitigate risk in a lot of cases, which isn't easy and right in their wheelhouse. And impact investing really takes it quite a step further out. And just the demographics of this industry are that it is, again, predominantly white men. The average age of the financial advisor in Canada is late 50s, early 60s. So they're not very far from retirement. And the thought of thinking about entirely learning an entirely new discipline and rethinking all of the ways in which you go about investing and what it means to do impact investing is, for a lot of them, not a step that they're willing to take, because they're not that far from retirement. They'd rather just wait it out, and they'll, their business, they might lose business because younger clients are caring more and more about this stuff, but they're too close to retirement. And so we have a big bottleneck there. And unfortunately, I do think one of the, we will get some change there, but I think a lot of it's going to come when they start to retire. And if we can usher in a kind of a younger demographic and much more diverse demographic of financial advisors to serve the diverse communities in Canada.
Great. Thank you so much. So we're at time. Ava Dana Sefa, Diane Mack, David O'Leary, thank you so much for your comments. Incredibly insightful. It's a journey. We're all on the journey. I'm pleased to be on it with all of you. Thank you so much for speaking with us here today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.